Chapter 23, A Toast to the Future. 3 weeks later, Hilda received a letter from Frank Hillstrom. He had just heard of the child's death. In the face of such a calamity, he wrote, he would not attempt to console her. He had been in Washington for some time now and was expecting to be in New York in about 10 days when he would come to see her. He walked in on her late one Saturday afternoon. Hillstrom was in the uniform of a Red Cross captain. Hilda noticed this, but expressed no surprise. The war had been productive of such unusual effects upon people that nothing in connection with it surprised her any longer. Several of her acquaintances she believed to be ardent pacifists were in France, in the trenches, having volunteered for the war. On the other hand, a number of men she least expected to oppose the war were either in prison as objectors or were in the shadow of such a sentence. Since the child's death, she had herself been thinking about the sick and dying on the battlefields of Europe. She would have been happy to go among them, to assuage their suffering, to lighten the last moments of the dying. In her state of mind, the work of a nurse would have been consoling, soothing. Her pacifist convictions were, however, in the way of her applying for war service. Hilda's appearance stunned Hillstrom. She had become pale and haggard during the 5 weeks that had elapsed since the child's illness and death. Her eyes looked as if she were about to cry, or had just ceased crying. She had been going from one paroxysm of tears to another. They spoke in snatches. Both were struggling with their emotions. Twilight had set in. He asked her to go to dinner with him. She dressed, and they went down together. They were walking up Fifth Avenue. Hilda was seeing the street again for the first time since America's entry into the war, and it astonished her not a little. The street had completely lost its pre-war civilian character. It was teeming with men and women in uniform, soldiers, officers, nurses. Hillstrom was constantly being saluted, and he saluted in turn. He was going through the motions quickly and dexterously. They turned into a side street and entered an Italian restaurant. The place bore a martial aspect. It was adorned with flags, American and those of the Allies. Most of the tables were occupied by officers and their wives or friends. They found a place at the far end of the room and sat down. When they had finished their soup, Hillstrom asked, "Well, what do you think of me as a soldier?" "I hardly know what to think," Hilda replied simply. "You are the last person on earth I'd look for in uniform. I had rather expected to hear of your going to prison as a pacifist." Hillstrom listened to her thoughtfully. A sad smile played about his lips. "And you believe in going to prison?" he asked. She looked puzzled. She was not sure she got the significance of his question. She had become so slow mentally at times since little Raymond's death. However, she answered, "Yes, for a cause. I would go to prison for a cause." "Well," he said as his smile vanished, "I used to think that way too, but I don't any longer. I am a firm believer now in keeping out of prison, in keeping on the job. The cause gains more that way." He was silent, flicking the ashes from his cigar. When he spoke again, the expression on his face was one of deadly earnest. "There are too many socialists, too many radicals and dissenters from the present order in our prisons already," he resumed, far too many. We permit ourselves to be decoyed behind prison doors too lightly. In ancient Rome, when a tyrannical Caesar disliked criticism, he gave the hint to his critics that they had lived long enough, and the noble Roman gentlemen obliged him by opening their veins and departing from this earth. After a while, the Romans learned that it was much wiser and healthier to open the veins of their tyrants instead of their own. Prison is today the substitute for the old method of opening the veins of critics. It is less pagan and more Christian. I am for turning the tables. The time has come for the rebels of this country, instead of going to prison, to send others there. Hillstrom stopped, took a sip of water, and continued. The war, whichever way it ends, will bring freedom to the peoples of Europe. It has already brought freedom to the people of Russia. But to us in America, it is bringing sinister reaction. Overnight, we have installed a military despotism that has curtailed our liberties in 1,000 different ways. Of course, our oligarchs, our public thieves and despoilers, want to stifle criticism. They want no independent mind on the inside of their activities. They want no honest man to see the desperate game they are playing with the fortunes of the people, with the lives of the proletariat. They want to sidetrack, to devitalize the forces that oppose them. They want a free hand. But it is the business of those who know and understand their game not to give them a free hand. It is our business not to be sidetracked. It is the business of the radical, of the socialist, of the friend of the masses to stay on the inside, to know what is going on, to be witness to every betrayal of public right, and to live to tell the tale. If the uniform becomes the only vantage ground from which to stand guard over the people's interest, let him put on a uniform. This is no time to quibble over tape and buttons. Hilda's eyes stood wide with admiration. Also, a certain relief was in them. You mean, she asked, that you've not become converted to war? That your uniform is... The tenseness left Hillstrom's face. He smiled. I'll wear this uniform, any uniform, he said, so long as it helps me promote my cause, the cause of the working people. The capitalists, the militarists, have no scruples about the uniforms they put on, so long as these uniforms serve them, help them carry out their plans. Right now, they are cloaking their militarist ambitions in the trappings of democracy. They are masquerading in our uniforms, painting our slogans of progress, humanity, and brotherhood over their bloody designs for commercial conquest and capitalist exploitation. Why should we scruple? Why not choose the safest cloak for our revolutionary work? Hilda was thinking over his last words when Hillstrom came back, speaking barely above a whisper. There's no other way. Dark days have come upon the country. For the first time in our history, open discontent has been made dangerous. We are driven underground, and we must resort to underground methods. Listen, he bent over closer to her. They are sending me to France in 2 weeks. At the first opportunity, I shall have myself transferred for service in Russia. Russia is the country we shall have to watch, to learn from, perhaps. The social revolution has already begun there. Moscow will probably be to socialism what Rome has been to Christianity. Hilda was thrilled. It was the first time since Raymond's death that she permitted herself a momentary enthusiasm over anything. "Russia," she said. "How I envy you. I should like to go there myself." "That," Hillstrom replied, "is precisely what I want to talk to you about. I thought," he hesitated an instant, "I thought in your present misfortune, Red Cross work, helping the sick, caring for children, relieving pain and suffering, might hold forth a welcome change. If you should decide at any time that you want to go into this work, then see this man." He wrote out the name and address of a colonel. Hilda put the piece of paper away carefully. "Ask to see him personally," he continued. "Tell him I sent you, and he will recall you at once. I talked about you already, and he promised to fix things up for you without delay." "If you go over to Europe," Hillstrom again leaned over close to her, "try to get yourself assigned to Russia, the nearest point to it. Perhaps we may meet there." There was a faint dreaminess in his voice. The waiter had come with the bill. He had also brought a bottle of fresh water. They were not serving wine to men in uniform. "A good proletarian drink," Hillstrom laughed. He filled the glasses. Hilda bent her head in deep thought. The restaurant hummed with conversation. In spite of the fact that no wine was served, the officers were flushed and hilarious. Their women companions were gazing upon them with yearning, tender eyes in which there lurked a furtive sadness. The band was playing patriotic airs. 2 tables distant from Hillstrom and Hilda, a company of officers and civilians were making merry. One of the men was telling of an encounter he had had with a socialist and what he had done to that long-haired fellow. The entire company roared with delight. Hillstrom and Hilda looked at the merry company and exchanged glances. Hillstrom consulted his watch once more. It was time for him to go. He lifted his glass and waited for Hilda to lift hers. "A toast to the future," he called, gazing deeply into her eyes. They clinked glasses. He drank his to the last drop. Hilda took a few sips and put her glass down. Her hand was trembling.